Dallas Famous podcast is supported by the Mullen & Mullen Music Project. The Music Project was created by Mullen & Mullen Injury Law Firm to champion the independent music scene in North Texas. I'm Andrew Sherman. I'm a Texas transplant who has always been in pursuit of art as a career. I've played in bands, pursued an acting career in Hollywood, but I found it behind the lens of a camera here in Dallas, Texas. I was born in New York, I've lived in Chicago, Los Angeles, Austin, but I love Dallas. There's a magical artistic scene in Dallas that mostly goes unnoticed to the outside world. This podcast is focused on what makes it so special and the people who make it thrive artistically. If you don't live here, and even if you do, you might not have heard of them. This is the Dallas Famous Podcast.
So who you gonna be? Who you gonna be when you're all grown up? Who you gonna be? Who you gonna be when you're all for us? Yeah.
This week on the Dallas Famous Podcast, we're excited to welcome John Bush, a legendary percussionist, drummer, and author whose diverse career has left a lasting mark on Dallas and beyond. John shares some engaging stories about his musical journey, influences, and the evolution of his artistry. Now, John is promoting his latest book, Queen Daffodils Demise, and is doing live appearances that blend storytelling with improvised music and spoken word. This is a candid conversation about a life dedicated to creativity, community, and the transformative power of art. Here it is. Hello, and welcome back to the Dallas Famous Podcast at the Deep Ellum Community Center. I've got John Bush. He is more than Dallas famous. He's a percussionist, drummer, writer, author from the band New Bohemians, Edie Brickell, Patrice Pike's band. I don't even think I'm familiar with Greasy Wheels.
They are an old school Austin band from the 70s and then later the 80s and 90s and still are a band. But they were the house band at the Armadillo World headquarters in the 70s.
Wow.
And at one point, Cleve and Mary Hattersley, who are a married couple, then Cleve's sister, Lissa, have been the core of the band the entire time. There's been a bunch of different members throughout its life, including Chris Layton. He left the band to go play with Stevie, and Cleve was like, Chris, I got to tell you, I think you're making a big mistake.
With Steve Ray Vaughan.
Yeah.
Oh.
But he was kind of joking and kind of being serious too, because Stevie was like he was known in Austin, he wasn't the famous Stevie Ray Vaughan, but that's a funny story and we all still laugh about that. But everyone that's been in that band, including Chris, are all still like family and friends. And, when they were Greasy Wheels inducted into the Texas Music Hall of Fame, Chris was actually on tour, so he wasn't there, but there's like 40 of us that went on stage to collect the award, everyone that had ever been in the band. And I still work with Cleve. He and Mary have moved to Las Cruces, New Mexico now, and we have a new record about to come out too, actually.
Okay.
And I'm not sure if he does streaming services or if he just sells it digitally or whatever. Uh-huh. Before we got on the air, so to speak, we were talking about music I've made and put out and produced in my own songwriting before. And at the moment, all my stuff is available on CD. I do plan to get a website where people want my music. I can be the one to give it away as opposed to using a streaming service. Or they can maybe set up a thing to pay or have a tip thing, because I'd rather do that. Streaming services, I think, are cool in a lot of ways for the listener and for people that want to, find stuff. My daughter, she used to discover music through YouTube. And it was amazing the stuff she would discover on her own because it would suggest stuff. One day she was playing a Chet Baker song. I'm like, how did you find Chet Baker, And she's got a very broad musical taste, and my son does too, but she's turned me on to all kinds of stuff that I either missed from the 90s because I was doing other stuff or new things that I wouldn't have heard about if it wasn't for her. So they can, have a positive thing, but there's some of them. Is it okay to say who I don't like in particular?
Yeah, absolutely.
I am vehemently against Spotify because that dude is such an a-hole. I just despise him and his whole attitude and the way he treats people, musicians, and the music he gives away. And so I think streaming services, they really need to reform the formula so bands actually really get paid when people are streaming their stuff, because those companies are making a buttload of money. So I don't diss people that use streaming services, but I personally don't. And I don't have my music on there. Now, Edie Brickell and the New Bohemians, we do have our stuff on streaming services now, and that's fine with me. And, it's out of my control anyway, but that's okay, So it's a weird, I have a weird feelings about it. Yeah. So anyway, so I was doing my own band. It was a great band in spite of me. I'd done my own music where I played drums and did my own vocals and lyrics, and off and on did that for several years, and then like 10 years or more, and then decided to do a new version of my music. And a friend talked me into calling it the John Bush Band, which was weird at first. And we have one CD or batch of music that we did and put out like in, I don't know, a long time ago. 2015. And then we have about 2 albums worth of material that we never finished. When Edie and the New Bows started playing again, I had to put that band aside. And all of a sudden, like 7 or 8 years have gone by. So we recently started playing again. And I'm definitely going to put those records out on vinyl. And the first John Bush Band record, I'm going to eventually put that on vinyl. And all this stuff I've done, I would like to do on vinyl because I love vinyl still. I know. And, actually CDs are making a comeback, which is weird.
They both
and funny. And yeah, albums have been since they, quote, went away. And there's a sonic range on CDs that you can't get on albums. But I do love the sound of vinyl. And I love the interaction of having to flip the side and it being an event,
Yeah.
So I, sometimes almost need to go to a 12-step program for vinyl buying. God forbid if I get out of a gig early and I've had a couple of drinks, I go buy Waterloo Records in Austin, on my way home, and I'm going to buy one thing, and then you leave with $150 worth of records. But
sure,
it brings me joy. So
yeah, hey, I mean, sure. Me and my wife are eventually going to give in and buy a record player again. I personally did not like all the scratches that I put on my records. So when I first heard CDs, I was like, oh, that's what I'm going to do from now on.
Right.
And now people keep giving me records, and I feel like guilty. So we should buy a record player so we can play them. So you are very Dallas. You did the Booker T UNT combo, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah, I only went to UNT for 1 year and then moved back home. And then I went to a great junior college in Lancaster, Cedar Valley, and they have an excellent jazz studies program there and a recording engineering program. And so I was doing that before I got busy with bands and work and quit going, dropped out or whatever. But that's a great school here in the Metroplex. And that was really more suited for me. North Texas was, it wasn't my cup of tea. The music department at the time, which is great music department, but they didn't have an Afro-Cuban anything or an ethnomusicologist like they do now. And, I still got a lot out of it, but it wasn't really suited for me. And Cedar Valley was smaller, so I felt more comfortable there and got a little more attention. And great school. So yeah, I had a really positive experience there.
Cool. Well, let's back up even further. Like what made you go, oh, I'm going to start banging on stuff?
Well, that's a great question. I always wanted to do that. At a really young age, I was really into music. My dad was kind enough to let me handle and play his records because I showed interest in them, like at a really young age, like 2. And I got my first record player at 2. My mom took a lot of pictures, so I remember these things because they were instantly in photo albums my whole life,
Oh, yeah. So
I remember that first trip to my own record player and putting a record on there. And so... yeah, I always wanted to play drums. And then on both sides of my family, my mom and dad's family, a lot of people play an instrument. A long time ago, everyone played a little bit, a piano or something. So in my family, it was kind of a requirement that everyone had to take a year of piano. And I did that in 3rd grade. And if you liked it, you could keep taking it. If not, you didn't have to. Well, I didn't keep taking it, but that was a prerequisite to get to play drums when I got to 6th grade, when they start you on band instruments. And so at the PTA meeting in 6th grade, they're trying to get you to play an instrument, and they still tried to talk me into playing something else. My brother played trumpet and cornet, and he also wanted to play drums, but got forced into trumpet, and then later did play drums in high school. But I didn't want to play that because I'd probably get a hand-me-down instrument, and his spit stunk. And my dad and grandfather played clarinet, and that was a cool instrument, I thought. But I wanted to do my own thing. Trombone seemed fun, but I thought I'd get tired of that. And finally, I gave in. I said, okay, I'll play flute. And they said, no, really, what do you want to play? And I said, I'll play flute. And I go, fine, you can play drums. I guess they didn't want to hear that frequency, that register. I think, was
smart,
can be
actually.
so harsh in the wrong hands.
Yes.
So, I got to play drums and just always loved it. So, I grew up in small towns before we moved to Dallas when I was like 15. And I just played drums along to records every day when I got home from school. And then was in, band learning, read music a little bit and play snare drum and the different things. And I really liked all aspects of percussion. So, your friends would hear you play drums along to Leonard Skinner or, the Rolling Stones or whatever you had on. And, man, you should be a musician when you grow up. I'm like, nah. And then at one point when we moved to Dallas, I was going to a little private school called Lake Hill in Lakewood area of Dallas. And they didn't have any kind of music stuff. It was a really small school. And at one point I was like, man, I want to go to a school that has music, and luckily we found out about the Arts Magnet, and I got in at the last minute my junior year. And that's really what made me realize that I wanted to be a musician. I really started doing piano again, which I wish I'd always stuck to, because you had to do everything there. And in theory class, you always took, piano that went along with it. And I was listening to Exile on Main Street one night with headphones on, and I was looking at those inside pictures, and there's the one of Mick and Keith singing together, and Mick's holding a bottle of whiskey, and Keith's got like a Coors Tall Boy or something. And they look so happy, It's like, yeah, why wouldn't I want to be a musician,
Sure.
So I'm really glad I did it, and the Arts Magnet was huge.
When you got there, was it like, because it sounds like you weren't even sure you wanted to be a musician, you just liked music.
Right.
When you got there, did you go, oh, this is above my head, or, oh, this is where I belong? Oh, okay, yeah.
No, so I had to go in and audition, and because everyone does. And it was like the weekend before school started, and the head of the music department, Dr. Cornell, is such a great guy. My mom he's like, well, we've got enough percussionists and drummers and blah, blah. And she's like, oh, she begged, just sweet talked him into letting us come down for an audition. So I went down, and in the little jazz combo room at Arts Magnet at the time, there was this band already rehearsing or playing, these kids. And I went up to the drummer and I was like, man, you're a really good drummer. And he's like, oh, thanks, but I'm really not a drummer. I'm like, what do you mean? He goes, I actually play trumpet. I'm like, oh, fuck, I'm cooked, because they were reading charts and just killing it.
Yeah.
And so, I sat down at the drums, and Kirk Bradshaw was the head of the jazz department in those days. And he came in and sat down at the piano, and he goes, I'm just going to play some stuff and you play along, okay. So he played something, and then he, after a couple of minutes, he stopped and asked me if I knew what time signature it was in. I said, no. He goes, well, it was 4/4. I'm like, oh. He goes, you were playing in 4/4. And I knew what time signatures were because, I was in band 6th, 7th, and 8th grade in Bonham, Texas. But I didn't really understand, feeling things like that. So then he played something in 3/4, and he asked me if I knew what it was. I said no, and he said it was 3/4, but I was following it and playing it. And he did something in 6/8, and I followed it. And so then they're like, okay, well, just play a little drum solo for us. I'm like, no. I was real embarrassed. I didn't want to do it. And me and another drummer friend at Lake Hill, we'd entered talent shows doing double drum set stuff, and we'd worked out parts. And, I knew how to play a solo to my degree of ability, but I didn't want to. And finally, I said, okay. And I did something completely bombastic. It was just like solid volume and as many notes as possible, just like the end of a Led Zeppelin song or something. And I just stopped. And there's this pregnant pause, and Bradshaw goes, "Well, you can certainly hit the hell out of them." And everyone cracked up. And luckily, they liked the cut of my jib. And, they're like, "All right, even the Irish, come on in, So it was great. And then at Arts, and when I went to North Texas, most guys wanted to be like a drummer, drum set drummer. And I always loved learning everything. Like I loved learning how to play mallets and doing all that in high school. And I just really enjoyed everything about percussion. My brother and I did have a box of like percussion instruments besides the drum set I had at home that I bought with my paper out money. We'd take turns listening to records, and whoever's playing drums, we'd shake shakers and tambourines and hold a cowbell and hit it, as many things as we could get going at once. And then when it was too late to play drums anymore at the house growing up, then I would listen to records and shake a shaker. I just couldn't stop, So
well, let me not to interrupt you, but
yeah, that's fine.
Were you listening, like what, I know you were exposed to a lot of music and your dad's stuff, but like, it sounds like you had a jazz interest early on.
Well, actually, jazz came later. So my dad's record collection was classical music. And so I enjoyed listening to classical music and still do, and know just a little bit about composers or can recognize stuff. But I mostly just like stuff or I don't, And then I was into rock and roll, but a really wide variety of rock and roll. Had an older brother who was a good influence. Jimi Hendrix became like my favorite artist in like 5th grade. There's no 5th graders growing up that were into Hendrix, I was like the outcast. I looked like a little John Denver wannabe, and I was listening to, because I had blonde hair that was like a bowl haircut, and I had these round glasses. I didn't want to be John Denver. That's just who people always said I looked like. I looked like the cousin on the Brady Bunch, when
Oliver. Yep.
Yeah, he kind of had that vibe going. But I was into Hendrix, so I had that working in my positive column. But anyway, yeah, so I grew up listening to all kinds of rock and roll, wide variety of music. And then when I went to Arts Magnet, started getting turned on to jazz, and then fell in love with that form of music. First it went, someone turned me on to Bitches Brew, Miles Davis. And so that was freaky and rock and roll enough where I really liked that. But I didn't understand it. And I would put it on at night to go to sleep, And then one morning I found myself, how when you're like singing a song in your head and you're like, what was that song? I realized it was the bass line from one of those Miles Davis songs off Bitches Brew. And then it all made sense. At first it sounded like a cacophony of cool noise, really. And then I heard, after that bass line came to me, I realized what the melodies were of the songs, or the groove and all the parts, and then got into, the older jazz and then modern jazz and all that stuff. So, and, I like, even country and Western music. I prefer the old school stuff that's more organic and stuff. But yeah, so, and then in Arts Magnet, so my senior year of Arts Magnet, they would have different musicians come in and teach, like classes or give lessons. And they had this percussionist come in named Brad Dutz, and he was the 1 o'clock percussionist at the time at North Texas. And that's when I got into congas and percussion full on. And I started taking lessons from him. And I had so many friends that were better drummers than me. And I was interested in playing this stuff. It's like, man, if I'm going to get to hang out with my friends more and jam, because otherwise they're going to be calling Big Al. I played drums with my buddies too, drum set. But it was like, this gives me a real outlet. And I found my own niche doing that.
Yeah.
And got deep into the Afro-Cuban stuff. And it was before the internet, so it was tricky, searching out that music and that information. And anytime I'd get to go to New York, I would go to record stores and ask people like, hey, who's the Jimi Hendrix of congas, And this guy turned me on to Ray Barretto and Mongo Santa Maria and, all this cool stuff. And then just kept going from there. And then we were on tour, and we were in San Francisco, and Brad Hauser and I were walking around, and we walked by the Haight-Ashbury music store, and he goes, hey man, I want to go in here. He was looking for something. It was almost like my record addiction. I was like, nah, man, I've sworn off music stores. I can't go in anymore. I always find something I want,
Right.
So we went in there, and sure enough, I was like, well, I need a larger tumba, super tumba, which is the biggest size conga. And I was checking out some stuff, and there's this guy behind the counter, and he was playing a drum, and all of a sudden we locked into this rhythm and we started talking, and we're still friends. And I ended up buying a set of Val J congas, which are coveted in the conga world. It was this great conga, and he was actually the guy that made the drums. And he introduced me to a guy named Mingo Lewis, who had played with Al Di Meola and played in percussion in the Tubes and worked with David Byrne and Brian Eno. Just had we played in Santana for a minute. And so when I met Mingo, he really opened up a new world for me. So that's when I really got deep into the Afro-Cuban stuff and learning that stuff, and thought about just totally going folkloric and delving into that. But it's like, I've got these rock and roll roots and this jazz thing. So I learned, and still learning as much as I can, and then applying it to how I use it in the music I do, even though I can, play along in a traditional setting, with that stuff. But yeah.
Right. Oh, that's cool. I mean, it's cool that you loved it so much, because it is like a nice like void in a lot of jam situations, I think, at least maybe at that time.
Yeah.
Like especially a rock situation. And then at Booker T, that's when you met some of the Bohemian guys?
Everyone. Brandon Ailey, the drummer with New Bohemians, I'm a little bit older than him, so he came the year I was already at North Texas that year, and he wasn't a freshman. We're only, I think, 2 years apart. It might be 3. I can't remember. But I don't think he started there as a freshman. He might have come his sophomore or junior year, sort of like I did. But yeah, Kenny Withrow and I, we met there, became best friends, met Edie there. We passed each other in the hallways a lot. We had lockers near each other and just always said hello. And then we didn't really start ever having a conversation until one day I went into Sound Warehouse on Greenville Avenue, and I was wearing a Talking Heads t-shirt, a jersey, the long sleeve t-shirts, and she came up and was like, "Hey, don't you go to my high school?" "Yeah, I like your t-shirt." "Yeah," and we started talking. Then became friends. I worked at North Park at a cookie store, Kathy Ann's Cookies, and it was right by a Melody Shop. So anytime she was up there going to Melody Shop to buy a new harmonica, because she's always playing harmonica, we talked. So anyway, yeah, but that is where we all met. And then Brad Hauser, he didn't go to Arts Magnet, but he was friends with all of us and lived in the neighborhood close to Alan Emmert, drummer with Brave Combo and Tin Hands, and Kenny and Big Al and I used to carpool together in high school. But so that's where I met Brad at Alan's house, and so that's where we all started playing music together too. So yeah, we've all been playing music together since I was like 17. Kenny was like 15 or 16. Brad was a year older than me, or maybe 2 years and a half or something. But yeah, it's funny. That's where we all met.
Was there like a moment where you're like, we're a band now?
Well, Kenny and Brad and I and Alan had been in some bands, with different names called the Knobs and stuff. And then when the New Bohemians formed, this would be like after we were in high school. It was a trio with Brad Hauser, Brandon Ailey, and a different guitar player, and a great guy who was always very supportive of us after we, everything happened for us. But Eric was his name, and Eric Presswood, and he wrote some great songs that we still, when we were still getting together, when Brad was alive, we would still play songs from that era, some of that Eric Presswood wrote, like Coldest Piece of the Sun. There's a song called Daylight, whatever. There's a bunch of good stuff. But they got together, and so it was a trio. And then Edie joined the band, the famous story of getting up and singing, spur of the moment with the band. And it was after hours at a club, so it wasn't open at the time, but musicians were still just hanging out jamming. And then shortly after Edie joined the band, Eric was like out of town or something. They got together with Kenny and wrote a bunch of songs, and they decided to go that direction at first. And of course, Eric wasn't happy about it at first, but he actually came around and was just so supportive of us, even back in our club days when we weren't signed yet. He was just he's such a sweet guy. And then after Kenny joined the band, and of course I'd seen the band and I could see how percussion, there's a space for it, So it was a classic story of the band was going to open for and back up Bo Diddley. They were going to be his band at the old Poor David's, the one on Greenville Avenue. And so Brad was the one. They bought a Bo Diddley record and we're listening to it, you know, and it's got all this maraca and clave and stuff on it. So he's like, man, we should get John to play with us on the Bo Diddley set. So my stuff was already set up, and I said, hey, can I sit in with you guys too on just like one tune? They're like, oh no, I'll play the whole set. And so then the rest is history. So then that's when I joined the band.
Okay.
And that would be September 12th, 1985.
Nice.
I can remember that date.
Thank you, Bo Diddley.
Yeah, thank you, Bo Diddley. And he was very cool to us as well. He was a little standoffish at first because, I mean, God, we were baby-faced kids, not even 25 years old. But then he heard us play and he really liked it. And he was very sweet. And he told all the guys when Edie wasn't around, he's like, that girl, she's something special. You hold on to her, you know? So he saw it right away. And he and Kenny had a great time playing together. They were both using touch-wahs and doing this robot thing at one point and walking around like robots. It was a great night.
Yeah. Kenny actually talked about that a little bit.
I bet he did, yeah.
That's a pretty cool moment. And then, like, I mean, then what? Then there was just like, you're just playing shows, just living your life, and then it blows up? Or?
Yeah, kind of. So I joined the band in 85, and we were becoming popular. You know, we only played Dallas, Denton, and Fort Worth some in those days. And we were becoming popular, but we would still have gigs because we would take any gig we could get. And we were playing 15 times a month.
Wow.
And so sometimes we'd play a gig at a funky place and there'd be no one there, you know. But our people would come to see us like at 500 Cafe. Dada wasn't open yet. 500 Cafe or Profit Bar and the Library in Denton. Those were our best gigs in those days. And then you know, record companies came into town. There was this woman named Kim Bowie who worked for MCA at the time, and they were interested in us, but then they passed. And so she gave our demo tape that we made at Caravan of Dreams in Fort Worth. And so we started playing out there some too. And gave it to these folks at Geffen, and they were interested and ended up signing us, you know. And then Kim ended up working for Island Records, and she's the one that put together the Deep Ellum compilation record, and she signed the Buck Pets, I think, and some other Deep Ellum bands. So we got a record deal, and then things really blew up locally for us. Every gig was packed, and we were already playing, and at that point, before we got signed, Dada had opened. And it was still just the one side, the small side of Dada in the back courtyard. So everything was kind of moving from Commerce Street over to Elm Street at that point, as far as places to play in Deep Ellum. And, but yeah, after we got signed, then, you know, shows were really packed. And it took a year before we went and made the record. So the record was made, and no one still knew who we were except locally, you know, in Texas. And luckily, there was a woman who was like the talent buyer or scout for NBC that was from Texas originally. She was a friend of Beard's, the door guy at Dada. And so she was one of the main people that got music for Letterman and Saturday Night Live. And so... yeah, someone, I don't think it was Beard, but she happened to know Beard, but someone, you know, for whatever reason, you know, they got us on Saturday Night Live. And that was, like, we had a tour booked, and a lot of it was really small clubs because no one in the country knew who we were yet. But we got to do Saturday Night Live, then all of a sudden that became like the first date on the tour, and things blew up then, you know.
Wow. Back then, I can't even imagine how big that was, even bigger than now probably.
It kind of was, you know, because there wasn't the internet. It was, you know, it was so in the public face, you know, when you were on the show, you know, and so that was amazing. So we sold, you know, they were hoping we'd sell 20, 30, maybe 50,000 records, you know, after we were touring for a while. And we were on Saturday Night Live and sold 150,000 records that week.
Wow.
Instantly. So...
Yeah.
It
I
was
mean,
pretty lucky.
I was a freshman in Chicago in college, and that What I Am song was just, I mean, we all got the album from that. And yeah, I mean, we were like, oh my God, there's like a new band that sounds kind of like The Dead, but not. But there's a
Right.
girl singer. It was amazing. It was a breakthrough kind of for us in a way. And I was in Chicago. I wasn't even down here. So.
Did you see us in Chicago?
No, I didn't catch wind of who you were until you had already come through. I was just starting to go to shows.
Right.
I had barely been.
Yeah,
but-
because man, we always had really great gigs in Chicago.
Do you remember where you'd play?
Yeah, I do. What's the place with West in the name?
Oh yeah, Park West.
Park West. We played Park West the first couple of times. And
Okay.
we had great gigs there.
That's not even a small venue, really, compared to some other ones. Like I saw like 10,000 Maniacs at Cabaret Metro, which is like minuscule compared to that. So, yeah, that's cool. And then, so I mean, yeah, you beat the expectations at first with the record label, and then what does that ride look like? That album coming out and all.
Well, it was not easy, even the making the record part, because our A&R guy was in love with Edie. I mean, like literally in love. Asked her to marry him, and they, didn't know each other. He was kind of a creep, really.
Yeah.
And then they were really trying to put a wedge in between the band and her, and any band is an interesting dynamic to begin with. I mean, sometimes you're all lovey-dovey, sometimes you're not getting along. Just normal stuff. And so we had some real problems navigating all that. Our manager at the time was a great guy. He and Edie were dating, but he all of a sudden was way over his head. And Monty was a great guy, though, and did us a lot of good. But then he didn't know exactly what to do, and all of a sudden we're swimming with the sharks, So there was even one point when making the record, we were having our own personal issues with each other. I can't remember the details. And it almost felt like we were going to break up. And it was Thanksgiving. And they don't celebrate Thanksgiving in Wales. We were in Wales making the record. And making the album was amazing, though. We had a 5-star chef making our meals for us at night. Like, they totally spent money on us making this record. Of course, we had to recoup it all, but
Right.
So we went in for dinner that night, and they had this spread out like it was New Year's Eve. I mean, they had party hats, they had blowers, with the thing that comes out, and a really special meal. And there was always table wine at dinner. And then if you wanted a glass of port afterwards, but so there might have even been champagne at that dinner. And we all, had this amazing meal and got tipsy, almost drunk, and we went into the studio all lovey-dovey after this day of like, this is it, we're done, and we recorded Air of December that night off the record, and the version that's on the record. And so the band was back together again. So when the record came out, they were still trying to put a wedge between us. They sort of, Edie didn't want her name on the record, but they forced the issue and made the band Edie Brickell and New Bohemians. And because we'd just been New Bohemians up to that point. And but the record came out, and we managed to survive everything. I mean, we were lucky to have those problems, because a lot of people don't ever get to experience the struggles that go along with it and the pressure. But we managed to survive it. And Geffen Records at the time was kind of notorious for signing a band and breaking them up and just taking the singer, So luckily we got through it, and we're all still friends to this day, and then when we did the second record, by the time it came out, Edie in particular was really burnt out on the music business. She never really wanted to be in the spotlight. Even when we were just a bar band, she was like, why don't you guys get like some dude singer and I'll write lyrics for you? And we're like, no, you're too good, and so charismatic,
Yeah.
So she and Paul Simon had met the first time we played Saturday Night Live, and they'd gotten married at this point, and she wanted to have a family and start a family. So when the second record came out, and the record company was still like difficult to deal with most of the time, we just pretty much just sort of stopped playing. We never officially said we're breaking up. We just took a really long break.
Right.
And so that would be 91. And then we didn't play again for like 3 or 4 years. And we got together for a benefit for a friend of ours that was murdered, and for her child, and just to sort of honor her. And so we started getting together like once a year doing benefits, you know. And we actually decided to get together and just start playing music and writing songs again. And so we did. And slowly but surely, we started working again under the radar kind of. And, you know, and have been doing that off and on, you know, since.
Right.
We would get together sometimes at least for a month every summer and write songs and record them, and sometimes do something with them, or just have them sitting, waiting, and then started playing gigs again, and, you know, made a couple of records. And then we took another big chunk of time off after Carter was killed, when Carter Albrecht joined the band, and he was such a breath of fresh air in the group, and such a great guy. And that was so horrible when he was accidentally shot and killed. So then we stopped playing for a long time again. And then we slowly got back together again and started playing again. And then, started making records again. And we actually have another record that we were working on when Brad died, coming up on 2 years ago. So we'll finally finish that one of these days. And we don't have plans to put the band back together again with a different bass player. But I wouldn't be surprised if we still got together again sometime and started making some more music together, the four of us, and other people that we sometimes bring into the mix now.
Right.
We kicked around an idea for a minute doing something kind of like Dead and Company. And because at Brad's memorial, when we performed a bunch of our music with different people on bass and different people singing, it was like, oh man, this could be really cool too. Because Edie's kind of tired of doing those songs and didn't really want to tour anymore per se. So maybe we'll still do that. You know, we've all got so many irons in the fire doing different things, you know. It's, you know, the older you get, it's like you start realizing like you can want to do all this stuff when you're in your 20s. You do stuff and you know, whatever. But now it's like, oh yeah, I really got to just focus on that. So you can't do everything. You can't ride all the rides all the time.
Absolutely. Well, I'm glad you guys did put it back together. I got to shoot you a few times. I was at the memorial. But it was cool for me to get to see you. And I mean, especially because you're one of those Dallas bands that, you know, as a photographer, I had to check you off my list at the very least.
Cool.
Isn't that funny though, that like you look back sometimes you're like, wow, like so let's foray into your latest career, which is an author.
Yes. So writing is always something I've done also throughout my life. Even at a young age, I was into the idea of writing stories, you know, and some of it as a kid at a really young age was almost like childhood fantasy in a way. Like, I'm going to be a race car driver and I'm going to own lots of animals and I'm going to, you know, I'm also going to be a writer, you know, just all this stuff,
Sure.
you know. And, but yeah, I've written stories off and on throughout my life, and I've always really enjoyed it. And then in school, anytime it was a creative writing project, I was always really into it. So, I've had some really great teachers in my life that have encouraged me and sort of nurture me and show me things that I was doing well, and, you know, also things to improve, but mostly pointing out the strengths, you know, to keep encouraging me to keep doing it. And I had this one teacher at Lake Hill named Bob Davis, who I'm still trying to find and look up and let him know I wrote this book. He was one of the early teachers early on that gave me extra time on some of my creative writing assignments and pointed out stuff. And he was just a great guy. We went to a baseball game together one time, me and another kid from school. You know, he's that kind of teacher, you know, a really good guy. It was funny too, the baseball game. He snuck in a couple of beers, and it was at the really old Arlington Stadium, three stadiums ago. And then at Lake Hill, I had some amazing teachers. My friend Scott Davison, who was at the All Good this weekend for the show I did. Matter of fact, I might be coming back on Friday to Dallas to do a reading at the school at Arts.
Oh, cool.
God, he was a great influence on me and very nurturing and encouraging of stuff and a great teacher. My English teacher, my junior year at Arts, gosh, I forget her name at the moment, but she was great. And reading Slaughterhouse-Five was an amazing, life-changing experience for me because that's where I got turned on to Kurt Vonnegut. And it was great because she had a list of books and everyone had to pick one. So no one could be like, I didn't read the book. What's it about? You know? Mm-hmm. And I'd missed the day before. So most of the books had been picked. And so the next day when I came in, there's like, I don't know how many, there was a smaller choice. And two of my friends in my class had already read Kurt Vonnegut, read a lot of his stuff. A lot of the kids there were just like, wow. And they're like, oh my God, you never read Slaughterhouse-Five, you got to read it. And so I did. And it was just, it's such an amazing book and story, and it opened me up. Yeah. I do too. He's one of my, I don't know if we call it idol or heroes or, so off and on over the years, I've written short stories. And I could never write anything longer than a short story. When we were making the first record in Wales, I wrote a couple of stories, and I got brave enough, because sometimes I would never show them to people. And I showed them to Edie, and she was really into them and helped me edit them and pointed out things that were good and things like, oh, you've said this, why don't you say it a different way? Kind of really great stuff, And that was a great moment where it's like, okay, I can do this, So off and on, I wrote stories, and always wanted to be an author besides being a musician. And then at one point, because I didn't write every day or anything, but I always keep a notebook for thoughts and ideas. And I started putting lyrics to my own instrumental music. So that became my storytelling. And that was a perfect outlet for it, short and concise. And, then one day I have my friend Cleve Hattersley from Greasy Wheels. He's also an author and writes all the time. And he just put out a book of stories from his life. And I just got the bug to start writing in. And I don't read all the time, but I do like to read. And I just reread On the Road. And it was the original manuscript that still had everyone's real name in it and stuff. So all those things combined, I just decided to start writing again. And I got up and I started writing a story one morning, and I'd had ideas for a longer story for a long time. And now that the internet existed, I Googled, how do you write a novel? And I got the greatest pointer of all was you just got to sort of poop out that first embarrassing draft. You don't worry about getting it correct the first time. Some things might come out great, but you just get the initial idea out, and you don't get hung up on fixing everything the first time, because that's what would happen. I would lose interest or lose faith in it or whatever. And so I started writing a draft that I still haven't finished, that I'm still working on. And then we got busy with music for about 6 months. I worked on this thing for like 6 weeks, and then got busy with music for 6 months. And when I went back to work on that story again, I realized I just needed more practice. I needed some repetitions, like going to the gym or learning a new instrument. So I started writing short stories, and 2 of those turned into novels. One of them's the novel I'm out promoting right now, Queen Daffodils Demise. And another one, I'm working on the finishing touches and hope to turn it into my editor soon.
Nice. Yeah. We were talking about it while texting about it, and I got about halfway through, and I'm really enjoying it. But man, is it just pulling vibes of the BS going on in today's world, like right into my head. Like I'm trying to get away from that when I'm enjoying something.
Yeah, I understand. When I started writing this book, I was all pissed off about, it was Snowpocalypse 4 years ago. I was really mad at the Texas government and their, just their lack of foresight and everything, their smugness and everything. And, here people were dying and, they think we're so great. We can succeed from the union and we don't need to be on your power grid. Oh, can we plug in for a moment now? So, I didn't know what it was going to turn into, of just an angry essay or what. Maybe it's a short story. Then it's like, oh, wow. And then it just blossomed into the story. And then when I wrote it, when I was finishing it, or the first draft or not the first draft, but before I turned it into my editor, because I worked on it for 2 years, and then my editor and I worked on it for almost 2 years together.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I thought we were on the other side of everything, because it started off during the Trump's first administration, and then. So unfortunately, it's super prevalent and is creepy and weird. The book is also meant to be whimsical and humorous too, and lighthearted, but it does have dark realism to it, and but
it has hope in it too. I mean,
it does, and that was part of it. That without giving stuff too much away, since you haven't finished it either, or some people maybe hadn't started it at all, but. As a species, we're still relatively new in existence in a lot of ways, even though people have been on Earth for thousands of years. It's evolution, and growth is a process, and that hopefully we can still evolve as a species, and not, you're not ever going to be able to. I'd like to think you could get away with a lot of evilness, like greed and so on and so forth, but that we can evolve, and that there is hope, and hopefully the stuff we're going through right now in our country and the world, even though there's some people that are never going to admit like how horrible these leaders are that we have in our country right now, a lot of people that were on their side are starting to switch. Like, I've got friends and family members that don't think and vote like I do all the time. And they're even like, I admit it, I voted for him, but this is too much now, So maybe it's going to bring more of us even together, where we realize, okay, it's not even about party anymore. It's just about good old fashioned right and wrong and morals. And
from your mouth to God's ears, man. Seriously.
Yeah.
But wrapping up with the book, though, I encourage people to check it out because it is enjoyable. It's not about these things. It's allegory. It's enjoyable, and I plan on finishing it. In fact, I almost feel like that I felt this pressure to get it before you were here, so I'm going to read it now that the pressure's off.
No pressure, and I'm glad you're enjoying it, because it is meant to be fun, and even though at times it is dealing with like serious issues, it's meant to be in a lighthearted and whimsical way, but to make people really captivated by it. Like, you got to make the villain bad, and so in the book the villain is bad. One morning I woke up, I'm like, man, I can't believe what I wrote about her, creating this character. Like, some of the things I had her doing, like, I don't know if I can put that in a book. I don't know if I want to reread that, but I reread it, and I might have taken out some stuff. It's like, okay, it doesn't go on as long as I thought, and it does make people know, like, okay, I'm not supposed to like this person.
Right. I wonder in your head if, like, because you're just writing what comes out, but like, I'm sure in your head it's even huger. If like maybe that's what it is. Like, you're like, to the depths of the core of this character, but like, you're not actually putting all of that on the page. It's more in your head.
Well, so sometimes it comes out in a spontaneous way. Like, I didn't really premeditate some of this stuff I created about Queen Daffodil, the villain in the story. Once I'd had some ideas about this person on a journey thing. The main character is a person named Ryder, and they leave the city that they're not supposed to leave. They're just basically trying to find grease for their bicycle chain. And there's no fresh water or food anymore, or hardly any. And then all this stuff happens to him. And when Ryder ends up with Billingsworth, that was a scenario I thought about. And you can't make just a novel about that, but it just sort of kept evolving. And I knew basically what I wanted to do with the story, but didn't really know what I was doing with it until I was doing it. And so, like, a lot of the characters in the book, Paraffin, have you gotten to Paraffin yet?
I don't remember.
Okay. You probably would. He's a celestial being that's on the journey with Ryder at one point to go find the Crystal City, where the People's People movement is trying to save Earth and our environment, because Earth's been decimated by wars and natural disasters, for those that aren't familiar with the book. And all this stuff. It's like, oh, it just sort of happens. Then you just run with it and you develop it, So yeah, when I wrote the stuff, made up the stuff about Queen Daffodil and how evil she is and some of the stuff she does to people. Yeah, it was kind of spontaneous. And then when, like I said, I woke up the next morning, like, I don't know if I can say that, but then went back. It's like, okay, I probably massaged it some to make it more palatable.
Right. Hey, John, this has been great. Is there anything, I mean, we know that the book is out. There's another book that's coming in the future. We got an album, John Bush Band.
John Bush Band. Hopefully I can get that done this year too. I've also, instead of throwing away my used drum heads, I paint them. Most of them are these abstract faces. So I'm getting brave enough to show my artwork. And so I'm showing those at some of these book reading. The book reading and performances I'm doing, it's sort of three elements. I improvise, make some music live, improvise loops and make these loops, and then I recite some spoken word pieces over them.
Oh, cool.
And then I tell some stories, and then I read from the book. And then I go back and forth between those three elements. And when I'm reading from the book, originally I wanted to create music live that I read from the book, but that's it can be too cacophonous and too busy. So when I was practicing reading to time stuff, to put together like performances, like, okay, knowing how long things would take to read a certain part, I'd happen to be listening to some Brian Eno music at the time. I love Brian Eno, the whole spectrum of everything about the man, but the ambient music he does, I love the most. And it's like, oh, this ambient music works. So I actually have carefully picked out different ambient pieces that I play behind the different parts I read. And it just gives it a little texture and atmosphere, it helps with the imagination,
Nice.
But, well, I know I've gone on and on about things, but thanks for having me, Andrew. It's been a lot of fun.
Absolutely. I mean, we're going to have links. You can check out all the stuff. Apparently not the music on streaming, but you can buy CDs.
Yes, you'll be able to buy CDs, and eventually I will have a website up where people can just download my music, either for free or make a donation, or maybe some stuff I'll sell. And then these performances, like I'm going to be going around the country doing these things.
Okay.
I'm going to New Mexico in May. I had a tour booked in January, then I caught the flu. I had 8 or 9 cities booked. And so I'm going to be coming back to Dallas. I'm going to do another one. I don't know when yet, at the All Good Cafe. People are opening up their homes to me. So sometimes I'll be doing house concerts with this stuff. Sometimes I'll be playing venues, be it clubs or music listening setting like at the All Good. And, I'm sure I'll be out there somewhere.
Awesome. Okay. Well, we'll try to make it where people can find you. And John, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, Andrew.
Definitely beyond Dallas famous. Appreciate it.
Buddy, thank you so much, Andrew.
I'd like to thank John Bush for joining me today. You can check out his book, Queen Daffodils Demise, on Amazon and everywhere else. The song we heard was one of his originals called Angelina. Opening theme song, Celine Nurala, Unstoppable. And the closing theme song, Electric Ants, The Place to Be. Thank you to the Mullen & Mullen Music Project for supporting this podcast. We'd also like to thank the Deep Ellum Community Center for letting us record there. You can catch the Dallas Famous podcast every Sunday at 1 o'clock on Deep Ellum Radio, and then Wednesday on all the podcast platforms. Please like, subscribe, enjoy, share, all the good things. We'll see you next time.